What's going on, folks? Welcome to Study Hall. If it's your first time here, my name is Philip Godfrey. If you're returning, welcome back, Bible Study family. And so, Study Hall is built off of the scripture in Matthew 6:33, where the Bible tells us to seek ye first the kingdom of the Father and his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you. So, we gather together to do just that, to see, seek, and serve the kingdom of the Father. And so today we'll be continuing a series of studies that we began at the beginning of the year entitled From Creation to Revelation, where we are walking through the entirety of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, book by book and chapter by chapter. Today we'll be finishing up the book of Ezekiel with chapters 40 through 48. So let's go ahead and jump into the study. And so, as always, study hall or these studies are a high level summary of the chapters that we're reviewing. So please take the time to go back and read and study yourself because I could be telling you anything. I'm not, but I could be. All right, so let's go. So as chapter 40 begins and we get into this stretch of chapters 40 through 48, what we begin to see here is a vision of restoration for the Father's temple and also the Father worship of the Father and also for the people of Israel, the entire 12 tribes again being restored. And we see that throughout this passage of scriptures. And so with chapter 40, what we see first is Ezekiel in the 25th year of their captivity. This is 14 years after Jerusalem fell and the destruction and all that happened. The final wave of exiles were taken out of the land and out of the nation. What we see now is that Ezekiel, in this 25th year, Ezekiel is having a vision. And in this vision, the Father takes Ezekiel he's dwelling in Babylon. So he takes him from Babylon into the spirit and he places him in the land of Israel. All right. And so once he brings him to the land of Israel, he sets him upon a high mountain, is what the text says. And then down below him, he could see the faint outline of a city. So this mountain was quite a bit far up from this city. But while he's there, Ezekiel arrives, and there's a man there who he says had the appearance of brass. Some translations say that the man shone like brass, but he had the appearance of brass, and he had a measuring tool in his hand. And so the man then speaks to Ezekiel and he tells him that he is to pay attention, basically, like, hey, listen to everything I say, look at everything that I'm showing you, and then set your heart to receive because what I am going to show you, what I am going to speak to you, what you're going to hear, I need you to go back, and what you're going to see, I need you to go back and declare these things to the house of Israel. So the entire purpose for Ezekiel even being in this vision, according to the text, is so that he can take this back, this information, this vision, take it back to the people of Israel and tell them, all 12 tribes, about what the Father is prophesying and declaring to do on their behalf in the future. All right. And so after this, we began to see this man and Ezekiel, but mostly the man. The man begins to take measurements of things. So at the end of chapter 40, we see the man taking measurements of the outside kind of perimeter wall and then like the outer court. So the area right inside of that wall. Began to taking measurements of those things, taking measurement of the courts, the steps, the places for burnt offerings, the windows, the posts. There were some chambers that were out there. He's taking measurements of all these things and then communicating these measurements back to Ezekiel, or just maybe he's just saying them out loud and Ezekiel's hearing them. But he's measuring everything. What he is doing essentially is giving Ezekiel a blueprint of what the new temple will be like, what that new holy place, holy ground, we'll see that a little later, with that new holy land, that new set apart place where the Father's choosing for his temple to reside, where that place would look like, what the bounds of that place are. And then when it is to be built, it should match these specifications that were laid out here. As we move into chapter 41, this theme is going to continue throughout the rest of the book of the kind of the measurements and all the different spaces of the temple and all that. But as we move into chapter 41, now the man who it begins to measure the areas related to the inside of the house. Okay. And so this house is identified as the temple. So that's why I've been calling it the temple. But he goes on to measure every aspect of the house, and he measures like the rooms, and he measures the height of the ceiling. He measures the doors and how many doors, and talks about cherubs and talks about palm trees and all these things. So he's measuring every aspect of this home, and again communicating those things to Ezekiel. Moving into chapter 42, we now see the man. He's measured the outside perimeter wall, he's measured the outer courts and whatnot, and he's measured the inside of the temple. Now he is going outside again and measuring a section outside of the temple, but inside of the wall in this outer court area. And as part of this section, there were a number of chambers or rooms. There were a number of rooms, and he's measuring these rooms. And then he tells Ezekiel that this section of rooms on this side of the temple, that they are for the priest. All right. And this was an area that had been set apart for the priest, where they could eat, where they could handle the offerings, where they could kind of do what the things that they needed to do, that was separated from the holy place. The priests were not allowed, only in certain times, under certain conditions, were they allowed into that holy place. And so we see here that this was the place that was set apart for them to dwell and to do some of the things that they needed to do, but it was separate. It was different from the actual holy place that was that they entered into under certain conditions. This brings us into chapter 43, where now we've seen he's seen the outer courts, he's seen the outside wall, he's seen the inside of the temple, he's seen the areas for the Levites and different things, he's seen the chambers, he's seen the man has shown him everything. He's shown him all these things, giving him all those measurements, and now in chapter 43 we see Ezekiel encountering the Father's presence, and we know that because he tells us that it was like he saw what he saw was like what he witnessed when he was by the river Chabar over in the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, where he has this interaction with the spirit of the Father, or the Father. And anyway, but now in this vision, the Spirit takes Ezekiel and brings him into the inner court of the house, and Ezekiel gets to witness the Father's glory fill this temple. What does this mean? Just like the Father's glory filled the temple when it was out in the wilderness with Moses and with the Israelites, then just like the Father's glory filled that, and it was a cloud, it was a thick presence, and no one could go close to it or in there or anything. This same thing is happening in this future state and time that Ezekiel is prophesying about. And he gets to witness the Father's presence enter and fill this place. This shows us that this is the place that the Father has chosen to dwell. And the chapter goes on to show us that. It speaks about how the Father tells him that this is where he's setting his throne. And this is where his feet are going to dwell with Israel forever. And the people of Israel will no longer defile him or his temple. And he tells Ezekiel to show the people of Israel everything that he has seen. Tell them the things that he has heard, so that they can be ashamed of their iniquities, can work through that process, come back into right standing, humble themselves, and then be able to experience everything that Ezekiel is kind of speaking about happening in the future. All right, does that make sense with everybody? And then as we move on down a little bit further into the chapter, the Father goes on to tell Ezekiel about the boundaries of this house, and how the boundaries of the house don't just stop at the first wall that we saw in chapter 41. No, the boundaries of the house extends to the entirety of the top of this mountain. The Father has set aside the entire of the top of this mountain for his temple, and as a holy land, a holy ground for his temple. The entirety of it is holy. And after that, we see the chapter ends. It begins. We see again the measuring stick come out, and the measurements are given regarding the altar. And also the chapter the Father's explaining to Ezekiel the offerings that are required upon that altar as well. All right. Let's move into chapter 44. And so this study today is a little quick, because these chapters are there are a lot more meat down in them, a lot of just very intricate details. But at a summary level, this is a pretty straightforward passage. And so in chapter 44, the Father then goes on to tell Ezekiel, he's bringing him out of the Spirit took him up into that inner court, and now He's bringing them out of that. And they go by a section of the temple that the father tells Ezekiel was closed and only accessible to a prince, or to the prince. Is how the text identifies this new gentleman, or introduces us to this new person, the prince. And this prince is going to be able to enter into that gate, enter into that area, and experience the father's presence. But everyone is not going to have access to that specific place. The father goes on to speak to Ezekiel as well, the laws regarding his house. So now that the house has been shown and all these things, the sanctuary has been kind of revealed. Now he's telling Ezekiel that these are the laws that should be put in place regarding his house and his sanctuary. And these laws kind of pertain to the Levites. They pertain to all the people as well. But he also tells him, Ezekiel, where the people had fallen away previously, and how they should use these new things that are being instituted to govern themselves going forward with now this new temple. So with the new temple, many of the laws are similar to what we see presented over in like Leviticus and different things, where we get the previous laws of the temple. But now there were other like certain, nuances or certain things that weren't mentioned here to be prophesied as part of Ezekiel's prophecy for the coming temple. But there is still instituted a process, even a process, some by sacrificial offering, that the Father is bringing back into play at this point in time in the future. Not for the same reason. Well, I don't want to tell you that because I don't. And you can study out why the Father is bringing those things back, if it's for the same reasons as they were previously or not. So as we move into chapter 45, we now see the Father, he's setting aside a designation of the land of Israel for himself. So we've looked at the top of the mountain, the temple that is up there on the top of the mountain in the land of Israel. But now the Father is kind of turning his attention and speaking to Ezekiel regarding the entire land of Israel that will be presented, that he will be presenting back to his children, all 12 tribes. And so he tells him that in that land, there is a designation that should be set aside for himself. All right. And so when the land is divided, they should set aside a portion as holy ground inside of those borders. And then he goes on to give him measurements of that as well, that this land will be this area will be a specific size and all these things. He goes on to tell Ezekiel that this land, this holy ground, is set apart for him. But there are two other set apart areas that are to be that are for the prince. All right. The prince. So this prince, we'll talk about that in the next chapter, but they're set aside for the prince. And the prince should have basically going to have a set aside part on a piece of land, a plot of land on the east and west side of the holy ground. And that will be the area that he dwells and that he kind of operates in. The Father then goes on to decree that his princes, so now we see a prince, the prince, and then there are also identified princes, plural, within the text, that these princes will no longer oppose his people, and then the remaining of the land outside of the set aside part for him and the princes, it should be divided among the people of the remaining tribes of Israel, all 12 tribes, and then he gives the princes and the leaders some statutes that they should follow as they are navigating this new season as well. As chapter 45 ends, we see the Father, he's addressing the feast that should also be observed by the people during this period of future time, this future time period as well. All right, let's move on into chapter 46. So in chapter 46, we get it speaks a little bit more about the prince. And so first, it states that this prince is going to bring burnt offerings and peace offerings into the presence of the Father in the inner court when it's open. And he's going to bring these offerings for himself and for others. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. And the chapter goes on to talk about all the offerings that the prince can bring and the process by which he must complete all these things. So, the text doesn't identify who this prince is. I kind of looked into it. There are a few schools of thought as to who this prince is. But there are a few things that lead me to believe that this prince is not the Messiah, because there are a few things that are in chapter 46 speaks about this prince having natural born children. It also speaks about this prince offering these sacrifices, these sin offerings and burnt offerings on behalf of himself and others. And so the Messiah would not need to offer a sin offering, or burnt offering, or any of those offerings for that matter, on behalf of himself, because he, doesn't fit that bill. And then we know that the Messiah does not have natural children. And so we don't know exactly, or I don't know, maybe you know. If you know, let me know down in the comments. But I do not know who this prince is, or who this prince will be, or if there's one or multiple, or how that process works. Okay. But I did want to say that because I think, conventional thought would be like, oh, this prince must be the Messiah. Well, we don't know. And these are some of the reasons that lead me to believe that it's not the Messiah. All right. But you can study all that out yourself. And so as the chapter ends, we see Ezekiel now. The father is showing him the places, what the place of, it's called the boils or something like that. The place where the boilers, the place of the boilers, where the priests are to prepare to boil, bake, and prepare the offerings unto the Father, and he gives him the measurements for that space as well. So every time there was a measurement given, the Father is basically giving a measurement for everything that's going on in this space. But the measurements are given so that so when these things are recreated and happen, we can know if these are the fulfillment of the things that we've been looking for. And the Father is giving us this detail for a reason, whether we understand it or feel like we need it or not. It's just good to really have and understand and know. So let's move into chapter 47. Chapter 47 speaks about, it talks about this house, and then it talks about the house of the temple that we've been talking about, and how there is a river that flows from this temple, that flows on, I think it's at the right side, don't quote me on that flows down one side of the temple. And it flows from this area down into the sea. And this river is healing. It is a river that heals the land and the wildlife of every place that it flows. It talks about how the fish return to when this river begins to flow. When it talks about how the people are live, and the animals live wherever this river flows. It talks about how the trees are flourishing and vibrant when this river flows. So this river is a depiction of a river of healing that flows from the Father's temple down amongst his people and into the sea. The end of the chapter then goes on to outline the divisions and boundaries of the land. So here the Father is telling Ezekiel the exact limits, the exact borders of the land that he's giving to his people Israel. He tells him every border: the north border, the east border, the south border, the west border. He tells them all of the borders. He uses towns that Ezekiel would have known. He uses, landmarks like rivers and other things. And it says something very interesting at the end. But the Father's telling them that this is their land. He's telling Ezekiel that this is his people's land of inheritance, right? And so as the chapter ends, the Father includes some here that I thought was interesting, really. It says that if there are strangers that live among the children of Israel, have children among the children of Israel, and are dwelling among the children of Israel, then those people they should treat them as if they were Israelites, as if they were children of Israel, as if they were descendants of the children of Israel. And it says that those people, those strangers, will have an inheritance among the tribes that they live with, that they should obtain an inheritance as well among the tribes that they live with. So I thought that was very interesting. You can study and read into that a bit more on your own. And as we move into chapter 48 and the book ends, we see here the Father just naming the 12 tribes and identifying each one of their lots and boundaries, each one of their lands of inheritance that was provided to them. The chapter goes on to talk about, the fact that there was not a portion of land that was provided for the priest, or inheritance that was provided for the priest, because the Father is their inheritance, but he did set aside land for them, a way for them to have land and crops and the things that they need to support themselves. The Father provided for that. He also speaks again about the holy area, and how there were areas set aside for the princes, and the prince in that area. And so it's really just the Father closing and tying up everything with the boundaries that he set for his people and the land. And we should be able to, if we were to look at a map and put those things on top of what we see now, we should be able to map out, the land that the Father promised the people, his children of Israel, and see whether that matches what we have today and all these different types of things, to see whether these things were fulfilled. The belief here the belief here through these chapters that we see is that this prophecy, this temple, will happen in the future. Will be a part of what has been considered like the 1,000-year reign of the Messiah. But that's for you to kind of study into and see for yourself your position on that, because I don't want you to believe me. I want you to believe what the text says, okay? And so the final verse of the book, and we're going to read this and we'll be done. The final verse of the book tells us that the name of the city, so he has the temple. There was a city down below, and the Father is talking about them coming back to their land and all the borders and all these things, and there's a sanctuary among the people and all this stuff. And the text says that the name of the city from that day that this happens forward shall be Yahuwah Shammah, which means the Father is there, which means that that's the place that the Father has chosen his presence to dwell, has chosen to dwell among his people, has chosen to live there, and to just rule there and reign there and operate from there. And this is the place that he sets his people and surrounds his people around his presence. So the same thing is true, that listen, the Father is there. He's closer to you than you could ever imagine. And his heart is that he dwell amongst his people. All right. So thank you guys so much for joining. That is the book of Ezekiel. We finished it up. It took us 5 lessons. So if you haven't seen any of the previous lessons, please go back and check those out. They're all on my page in a playlist entitled From Creation to Revelation. For Sunday, as part of Bible study, we gather on Sundays at 8 p.m. Central Time. So if you want to join in that, this week we'll be looking at the entirety of the book of Daniel. So go ahead and read that for you for Sunday. And that's all I got. All right. So I love you, but more importantly than that, the Father loves you. Let him love you. Okay. Start before you're ready and don't stop. I'll catch you guys next time.